a blockbuster hearing into alleged corruption by Hunter Biden and the larger Biden family. Two IRS whistleblowers, one whose identity was revealed for the first time today, testified that senior Justice Department officials slow-walked and obstructed the criminal investigation into President Biden's troubled son. That begins with the news you need to know. Two whistleblowers appeared in a public hearing before Congress today after appearing in closed hearings in June. They provided further testimony that the Department of Justice seriously mishandled the Hunter Biden criminal tax probe. One of them is Gary Shapley, a 14-year IRS veteran. The other, previously anonymous, is Joseph Ziegler, a 13-year IRS vet. After providing a lengthy list of his credentials, Ziegler outlined in detail what he saw happening in the Biden tax probe and why serious questions arose for him.
I have outlined for you some instances in which assigned prosecutors did not appear to follow the normal investigative process, slow-walked the investigation, and put in place unnecessary approvals and roadblocks from effectively and efficiently investigating the case. A number of times we were not able to follow the facts.
There should not be a two-track justice system depending on who you are and who you're connected to. Yet in this case, there was.
No matter what my GOP colleagues say, and I appreciate the testimony of our witnesses today, there is no evidence that Hunter Biden has received any kind of official favoritism in this prosecution for being Joe Biden's son.
His testimony today largely supported Shapley's testimony, which asserted that the Department of Justice blocked efforts to obtain subpoenas and prevented prosecutors from filing felony charges. We're joined now by Eric Eggers, Vice President of the Government Accountability Institute and host of the Drill Down podcast. Eric, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Lindsay. It's great to be here.
Okay, Eric, what were your biggest takeaways from today's hearing, and do you feel like we learned enough new information?
I think we could have learned a lot more information, Lindsay, and I think, unfortunately, that's due to the grandstanding that occurred by members of both parties. Democrats seemed primarily interested in establishing the fact that Joe Biden wasn't actually president in 2018 when the investigation was first initiated. And a lot of Republicans, quite honestly, I think, seemed interested in basically creating clips for their social media accounts. I think there could have been a lot more discussion of the whistleblower testimony, which detailed, I think, plainly that there was evidence of a lot of crimes that were committed, evidence that refused to be taken up by people within the Department of Justice, higher-ups within the IRS, and quite honestly within the FBI. And so I think the good news is that there are members of the House Oversight Committee that said, hey, we're sorry that no actual law enforcement entities seemed interested in this, but we want to continue to ask questions and gather information. And so I do think that the investigation moved forward, but not as forward as it could have.
So one thing that we did learn, I will say, Eric, from Joseph Ziegler, who was one of the whistleblowers, he laid out that there is $17 million worth of transactions that the Biden family received between 2014 and 2019. You always say, follow the money, but right now we don't know why they were getting this money. What were these foreign companies, these foreign countries paying for?
Yeah, it's a great question, Lindsay, and I think it's the question to ask. And Joseph Ziegler, I think, did the impossible today. He had millions of Americans rooting for an IRS agent. So I think you look at the $17 million that he brought up, you look at some of the text messages and WhatsApp messages that they also discussed during the meeting, in which Hunter Biden is bragging to some of his business associates that the Bidens are the best at doing what you want us to do. He's getting his father, Joe Biden, to show up at meetings with Chinese energy officials and elsewhere. And so that, what were they selling? They're selling access to the former vice president. They're selling access to the future president. They're selling access to the Biden family. That's what any Bidens do. That's one of the reasons why, while Mr. Ziegler is focused on $17 million with bank records, we've reported at the Government Accountability Institute that the Biden family has taken over $30 million from people in China connected to the Communist Party and the Communist Party's espionage ring. So this is what they do. They take money. They don't really ask a lot of questions, and they deliver Joe Biden when they need to.
Okay, so something else that came out, we had Gary Shapley, who has already done some interviews before, but obviously before Congress right now, testifying. He said that there are actually more WhatsApp messages that they weren't allowed to gain access to. Do you think that this raises awareness that will force almost the Justice Department to release these or give them at least to the Oversight Committee?
No, that's another excellent question. I think the biggest takeaway for me is the amount of things they could have had access to but weren't allowed to. The fact that they even kept the investigation secret, they thought was meant to give the FBI more access because they were going to continue their investigation. But then the FBI chose not to pursue certain things, also because of the last name. So I think it's very frustrating. And the fact that the House Oversight Committee did say, listen, we appreciate that the FBI didn't pursue some of these things. We will. I think that's the biggest takeaway from today.
Yeah, there's a lot more still to be uncovered, a lot of questions that didn't get answered, but at least they know a little bit more where to go, and following the money is one of those. Eric Eggers, always good to see you. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure, Lindsay. Thank you.
We're joined now by Julia Manchester, a political reporter for The Hill. Julia, welcome back to the show. It's good to see you.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Okay, so essentially we have two narratives going on here. We have these whistleblowers out now saying, which we've heard some of them before, but before a congressional hearing today, that the U.S. Attorney of Delaware, David Weiss, was blocked in his investigation of Hunter Biden by higher-ups at the Justice Department. We already had Attorney General Merrick Garland come out and say that wasn't true, and David Weiss himself said that wasn't true. So did these whistleblowers today prove enough that they're the ones telling the truth?
Yeah, look, I mean, we'll have to see how that really plays out. I think these whistleblowers were very much trying to convey to the Republican-dominated committees that brought them in that they certainly were telling the truth. But we're seeing really two narratives come out about this. You have, obviously these whistleblowers saying that there is wrongdoing or some sort of double standard in the Department of Justice. And then, of course, you have the Attorney General and others pushing back against that. I think a lot of these congressional hearings oftentimes end up being sort of a showboating exercises for a lot of these committee members, an opportunity to get a soundbite, and we don't actually tend to hear a lot of questions being asked at these hearings. However, they're an opportunity for them to get a message across.
Okay, so before I switch topics with you, here's the big question. Does it change the mind of any potential Biden voters in 2024 with all these investigations that are going on into Hunter Biden and these allegations against the Biden family?
I don't think it changes the mind of any potential Biden voters. I think many voters, with the exception of undecided, moderate, independent voters, they're already decided at this point. And this, I think, is seen as very much inside baseball on Capitol Hill at this point. I think voters care much more about the issues such as the economy, healthcare, education, crime, immigration. I think a lot of these investigations, whether it's on the left or the right, I think a lot of Americans view them as politicized to an extent.
Okay, so I do want to switch topics with you because yesterday we found out that Trump is the target of a January 6th probe from special counsel Jack Smith. We knew this was likely coming down the pike, but how does this affect Trump in 2024? Because we saw the last indictment only fuel his campaign. He raised a ton of money off of it, and his poll numbers didn't shift at all. But this one does seem personal to his base.
It does seem personal to his base. And, I think that's why you see a lot of other 2024 contenders like Ron DeSantis, Mike Pence, Nikki Haley being very careful about how they address this issue. Ron DeSantis in the CNN interview yesterday said he hopes Trump isn't indicted or charged. You saw Mike Pence say in an interview on News Nation that he thinks that the judgment of Trump's actions on January 6th should be left to the American people. So I think they're very much trying to walk this very fine line of not wanting to take off his base. And I think there's also the question of what a lot of Republican and conservative voters see as a double standard and how Republicans and Democrats are being treated by federal law enforcement agencies. We heard Ron DeSantis say yesterday that if Hunter Biden were a Republican or had an R next to his name, was the son of a Republican, he would be treated very differently. So that's how we're seeing them approach this. But in terms of Trump, it's certainly true that he's seen fundraising bumps off of these charges. He sort of makes campaign stops out of these charges. Last night, he did a Fox News town hall. Last month, when he was in Miami and charged in the federal documents probe, he made a campaign in the Little Havana neighborhood. So he certainly knows how to gear up the messaging on this.
And he wants to continue to gear up the messaging. We know that he's already asked in the previous indictment that it would be pushed till after the 2024 election. Jack Smith, however, said he wants to move quickly. He would like to see this come as soon as December. If this doesn't get moved, Julia, if we do see this happen during the 2024 campaign, how could that impact him for better or for worse?
Look, it would impact him in a huge way. I mean, if he has to be in court, and present in court, that's going to impact him that would take time off of the campaign trail. And it would also sort of politically suck up the oxygen from the other candidates, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat he's facing. So, it's unclear how this would work because this is unprecedented. We haven't seen this before, but I think Trump and his team are certainly trying to buy time. And we have to remember, this isn't the only legal issue he's facing. He's facing a host of other legal issues. He's already been charged twice, including one time on federal charges, or in two other cases, federal charges. So it's difficult to see how this is going to play out.